Trigger warning. This is a difficult video, okay? You got it? Okay. Just in case anybody, is a little sensitive to this kind of stuff, this is pretty horrific language from Matt Walsh. So just, if you don't want to watch this, I understand. This is Matt Walsh saying that he would rather die than be the father of a trans child. Here we go.
And when I consider that my own children must inherit this culture, that Dylan Mulvaney and his ilk will prey upon my children and try to turn my own sons and daughters into mutilated, mutant, self-loathing, hollow, twisted shells, just like themselves, well, my anger then turns into more of a boiling rage. And I know that I will do whatever is necessary, and I will speak whatever truths are necessary to protect my kids from this hellish, God-forsaken madness. Now, I have personally heard from many parents, more than I can count, who tell me versions of the same horror story. A beautiful and innocent kid one day, seemingly out of nowhere, gets sucked into the gender cult and is devoured by it.
Devoured.
The child they held as a baby and raised and gave their lives to and loved and still love becomes suddenly unrecognizable. All of their innocence and light and beauty just drained out of them, replaced by this self-cannibalizing madness. For a parent, to see this happen to a child, it is a fate worse than death. I would rather be dead than have that happen to my kids. See, the thing that I most despise about Dylan Mulvaney is that he is part of a movement which actively seeks to turn my children into Dylan Mulvaney. That's why I'm entitled to my anger and to whatever language I use to convey it. I will say whatever I want to say, and I will be justified in saying it because these people are after my kids and yours and everyone else's. And you're worried that I'm being a little rude? Well, you see, when it comes to my children, the children that I cherish more than my own life, if you think mean words go too far, then you would be very shocked to hear how far I would really go to protect them. Trust me, words are the least of it.
Yeah. You don't seem to actually cherish your own children more than your own life because you said that you would rather die than have your child be trans. Dylan Mulvaney, the person he's referencing there, is a trans TikTok person. I hope to God for his children's sake that they are not trans because I don't know how, I can't fathom how that would feel to see your father say that publicly. And say that with such vitriol and vehemence. And I've made this point before, but it is amazing how freaks like Matt Walsh have very little awareness about how, for them, this is all based in anxiety about their child not being a full extension of themselves. It's a fundamentally narcissistic premise. Beyond, the fact that they're puritanical and notice all of the kind of biblical hell language that Matt Walsh imbues in that because he's a theocrat. He is a far-right fundamentalist theocrat. Hellish horror story, children being devoured, calling them mutilated, trans people mutilated mutants. And by the way, this is the same guy who, when asked a very simple question on the Joe Rogan program, didn't have a clue about how many kids are actually undergoing transition in the United States. He did a documentary, this dumbass, on this very topic. He went to Africa. He traveled the globe to ask, what is a woman? And he didn't bother to do a basic remedial fact check about the very topic that he not only did a documentary on, but spends so many of his days speaking about on his program, spewing hate on. He thought that there were millions of kids undergoing transition care, and he kind of hints at that fake notion there. He hears from parents all the time. What do I do? He thought that there were millions of kids undergoing transition care, and because Rogan had been in a little bit of legal hot water for repeating the fake litter box conspiracy theory on his show with Spotify where he makes millions of dollars, his fact checker had to say, actually, we looked it up and it's 5,000 kids over a multi-year period. 5,000 versus a million. Millions. Whatever exactly he said. I think he said somewhere around a million. He's lying. He's lying to you. He is inflating this threat of the looming groomers who are going to change your child's composition to make them trans. He is making it up out of whole cloth because he hates trans people. That's it. And if his child, God forbid, was trans and did transition, this narcissist wouldn't kill himself. He'd just kill his child's spirit. There's no way that he would leave this earth because he thinks so highly of himself because of that. He'd just hate his own child. Is that the Christian thing to do? Mr. Christian? Is it? You know, it just... He's not protecting anybody. And I tell you, look on YouTube, watch that Vice documentary, short 20-minute investigative piece on 3 families of trans children that are fleeing the state of Texas because they're in fear for their child, and how skeptical those parents were. But when hearing their child and respecting their child's perception of themselves and their agency, they were open-minded to see, this is how my child is, indelibly, inextricably. Not an extension of myself. Like, Matt Walsh's capacity to understand other human beings is as limited as a fungi. He's got no understanding because he is obsessed with his own worldly perception. He has no curiosity. And that just inverts itself into hatred within himself. He doesn't actually want to know what it means to be trans in America, what it means to feel like you are in the wrong body, and what it would mean to have a parent that understands that and is accepting of that. He, with his multimedia operation, is hoping that other parents are as shitty parents as he is, as bad, as self-involved, as narcissistic as he is. And he wants them to deny their child's humanity and existence in favor of their own selfish desire to have their children reflect who they are as opposed to them being individual human beings. The amount of ego, the amount of narcissism it's unfathomable to me. And I'm glad I really hope none of his children are trans. But either way, they know from looking at this that his love for you is really only based on whether or not he can see himself in you. This is hate speech. It's been ramping up at the Daily Wire. Him and Candace Owens calling trans people every name in the book. Genocidal rhetoric. This is not going to end well. This is incredibly dangerous.
And it's even worse when it gets laundered and more delicate and genteel and lightly academic wording and verbiage in the in places like the New York Times and the Atlantic Monthly.
Yeah. Thank you,
New
New York Times.
Yeah, it's part of the same project, just with different ways of saying it and different levels of anger and frustration and hatred and vitriol. They contribute to the same project.
They do. I mean, and the Times has been kind of indignant about the critique of their coverage. We just were speaking with our guest Malcolm Harris about how Stanford University from its inception was studying eugenics, right? Like really involved in race science. And at that time, that was just within the bounds of like academic thought, right? And the Times and other established institutions engage in that same exercise that has the trappings of creativity or journalism or just asking questions, when it's not just how you cover something, and how the Times has covered this has not been good, for sure, but it's what you choose to cover. Like, that's what journalism really is. It's story selection just as much. And the overemphasis of, have we gone too far with this? It's gonna age like milk. And it feeds into the extremist, hateful media operation over there at the Daily Wire, headed by the charismaless, talentless, hateful man in Matt Walsh. This is all he's got, too, right? This is all he's got. He's going down with the trans ship. So he's got to get more extremists, too. I mean, Candace Owens has the same problem. They don't stand out in their workplace. So they go harder. I mean, hers is just like a little bit more, she's a woman and she's black at the Daily Wire, so she's got to overcompensate. He has to overcompensate for being entirely talentless. So they go really hard with the hate, because they're within, trying to give a different flavor within their own horrific institution.
Right, like what they lack in sort of like charisma, they make up for in bigotry and hatred.
Yeah. Right. For him in particular.
It's just like a force multiplier for Matt Walsh. He's like, more people will watch if I'm just actively like, I'd rather kill myself than ever.
And I'm sure that he's happy that outlets like, whatever, Media Matters or the Majority Report are talking about this. But you can't leave it in a vacuum and not address it. Even though I'm sure this is exactly what he wants.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. But I also think it's just important to focus on how much the disparity between the coverage of these issues and the level relative to the population level of trans people in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the idea of thinking that 1.3% uptick in trans affirming care for teenagers, that's a pretty sizable percentage. It's a sizable percentage of a very small population level in this country.
Yeah.
It's putting an unbelievably undue burden on not just a minority of a minority. And I don't say that to diminish trans people. I'm saying that that's why people should leave trans people the fuck alone.
Yeah.
Because you even talk about some of these athlete bans, these trans athlete bans across the country. That one in Utah that ultimately got the veto was overridden. The governor vetoed the bill and it was overridden by the state legislature. And his reasoning for that, it was because there were two of them. There were two of them in the state of Utah. They were legislating a ban on these kids participating in sports for 2 children. It is unconscionable to dedicate state, federal, local resources, whatever the case may be, to legislate a ban for a literal couple of children.
I mean, I get emotional just thinking about those kids, how they already feel marginalized, alone. And
they're
then,
on the news, and they're news stories, they're headlines.
Yeah, and God forbid that they listen to a guy like Matt Walsh, right, who says, "I'd rather die than have you."
Right. Or that woman, or that girl Riley Gaines, who always goes on Fox News. She competed against the trans swimmer Leah Thomas, I think once or twice when they were in elementary school. It's like, you know what, Riley? Get a real job.
Yeah. I got to pivot off of that before I lose my mind. Charlie Sheeher, thank you for calling Matt Walsh and his ilk's rhetoric genocidal. I hear centrists saying it's too strong a word, and it's relieving to hear other people recognize that crap for what it is. Omaha John, these New York Times and Atlantic stories about trans people aren't going to age like milk because it was spoiled and gross in the first place, and that's demonstrated by their answers to backlash on it.
And I will say, this is part of a larger thing that really annoys me about New York Times op-ed writers or some New York Times reporters, is that they get so indignant and up in arms about like genuinely legitimate and like reported and nuanced criticism of their output.
Mm-hmm.
They always treat it as if someone's just like being an oblivious, uneducated asshole. And it's like, people are doing this because they're reading your work and they're seeing what you focus on and how oversaturated and how flooded the zone is on these kind of agnostic pieces about trans healthcare for kids. Parents are concerned about that. Maybe they can't know their kids' pronouns in school. It's like, who is asking for this?
Yeah. No, I mean, but
how many
but
parents?
They are. I mean,
Yeah.
they are a part of a highly educated class that resents the pronoun kind of HR exercises at the New York Times corporate offices.
Absolutely.
And then they've turned that into fucking like articles on it.
Yeah, a cottage industry, basically. Yeah.